All right, so we're diving deep into the 5 a.m. club today. And, you know, you've sent me a whole stack of articles on this. Some are calling it like the ultimate productivity hack, but others are saying it's going to lead to burnout. What I thought was interesting was you even included some research on sleep inertia, which kind of seems to contradict that whole, head start idea.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so fascinating. This 5 a.m. club thing really taps into our desire for a quick fix. That magic bullet that's going to make us successful. But as your research shows, our brains and our bodies are a lot more complex than that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack this. What is it about this 5 a.m. thing that's so captivating? Like, what's the allure?
Well, I think proponents of this 5 a.m. club often talk about the peace and quiet of those early hours. It's uninterrupted time, so it leads to better focus. They also argue that it helps people feel more in control of their day. In your notes, you even highlighted that 20-20-20 formula. 20 minutes of exercise, 20 minutes of reflection, and then 20 minutes of learning.
Right. Yeah. That 20-20-20 thing really got me thinking. What kind of learning are we talking about here? Is this like reading a dense textbook, or is it something a little more casual?
That's a great question. The book emphasizes feeding your mind with something that is positive and growth-oriented. So, it could be reading an inspiring biography, it could be listening to a podcast, maybe even just reviewing your goals for the day. But the key is that you want to stimulate your mind and set a positive tone for the day.
Okay, that makes sense. But like you said, it's not just about, grabbing a few extra hours in the day. There's a whole psychological aspect to this too. I've heard people say that the 5 a.m. club helps foster discipline and self-control. Is there any truth to that?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there have been studies that show a link between rising early and personality traits like conscientiousness and proactiveness. But it's kind of like the chicken or the egg dilemma.
Yeah.
Do those traits lead people to become early risers, or does waking up early cultivate those traits?
Now, that is really interesting. So we don't know for sure if it's cause or effect. I'm really starting to see why this has become such a debate.
Exactly. There's definitely a psychological component at play, but we need more research to unravel it all. And let's not forget about the potential downsides here. You included some articles about the risks of sleep deprivation, which are definitely worth exploring.
Okay, so let's go there. What happens when forcing ourselves into this early bird mold backfires? What are some warning signs that maybe we're pushing ourselves too hard?
Well, the most obvious risk is chronic sleep deprivation. If you aren't getting enough sleep, you're going to feel it, both mentally and physically. Fatigue, irritability, difficulty concentrating, these are all red flags that you might be pushing yourself too hard.
Okay, so I'm understanding this correctly. Even if I manage to drag myself out of bed at 5 a.m., but I'm constantly exhausted and my head's all foggy, it's probably not doing me any favors in the productivity department, right?
Exactly. And those are just the short-term effects.
Yeah.
Chronic sleep deprivation can increase the risk of some serious health issues down the line.
Oh, wow. That's a little bit sobering. So we've got this potential for increased productivity and self-discipline on the one hand, but this risk of burnout and health issues on the other. Seems like finding that balance is really key here.
Absolutely. And a huge part of that balance comes down to understanding your individual chronotype. It's this idea that we all have natural sleep-wake preferences. Some of us are just wired to function better in different times of the day.
You've mentioned chronotypes a couple times now, and I love getting into the science-y side of things. Can we dive a little deeper into that? I'm especially intrigued by the research you sent on cortisol and melatonin and how those hormones regulate our sleep cycles.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we talk about chronotypes, is this like that whole, early bird versus night owl thing?
Yeah, exactly. It goes beyond those simple labels, though. Our chronotypes are influenced by our genes, our age, even things in our environment. And these chronotypes, they're really closely tied to our circadian rhythms, which are like our internal clocks.
Okay, so if I'm naturally a night owl, does that mean my circadian rhythm is just programmed differently? Am I basically fighting an uphill battle if I try to force myself into that 5 a.m. routine?
It could definitely be more challenging. Remember that research you flagged on cortisol? Well, cortisol plays a big role in our sleep-wake cycle. And early risers, they tend to have a surge of cortisol earlier in the morning, which gives them that burst of energy to get going. But for night owls, that cortisol release happens later.
So it's not just about willpower. There's an actual biological reason why some people pop out of bed and others are hitting snooze 5 times.
Precisely. And when you try to fight your natural chronotype, that can lead to that feeling of sleep inertia that you mentioned before. It's that grogginess and disorientation you feel when you're forced awake before your body is ready.
Okay, so let's say I'm determined to try this early rising thing. but I think I might be a night owl. Are there any strategies to maybe shift my chronotype or at least make the transition a little less jarring?
Yeah, there are a few things you can try. Gradually shifting your bedtime and your wake-up time,
Hmm.
even by like 15 minutes each day, can help reset your circadian rhythm over time. And light exposure is really key. Getting lots of sunlight in the morning and then dimming the lights in the evening. That can really help signal to your body, when it's time to be awake and when it's time to wind down.
So basically trying to mimic those natural light patterns to kind of nudge my internal clock in the right direction.
Exactly. And consistency is super important. Sticking to a regular sleep schedule, even on the weekends, can make a big difference.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the downsides of the 5 a.m. club, especially if it doesn't match up with your natural chronotype. But I don't want to totally discount the potential benefits here. Are there any situations where this kind of routine could actually be advantageous?
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely people who really thrive on an early morning routine. Like if you have a job that requires you to be on early in the day,
Hmm.
or maybe you just find that you're most productive in those quiet morning hours, then a 5 a.m. wake-up call might work really well for you.
And I imagine for people who are naturally early risers, it just feels natural, right? It's not a struggle to get up and going.
Exactly. And for those who are very motivated and disciplined, that extra time in the morning can be super valuable. They can use it to exercise, meditate, work on passion projects, or even just enjoy some quiet time before the day gets crazy.
So it's not one size fits all. It really depends on your circumstances, your chronotype, your goals.
Exactly. And even if you decide that the strict 5 a.m. wake up isn't for you, there's still some valuable principles you can take away from this whole philosophy. The focus on being intentional, creating a morning routine that sets you up for success, prioritizing those things that are important to you. Those are all takeaways that can benefit everyone, regardless of what time their alarm goes off.
I'm starting to see that this is about so much more than just the hour you set on your alarm clock. It's almost like a mindset shift. It's about being intentional with your time and your energy.
Precisely, it's about designing a life that works for you, one that supports your productivity and your well-being.
Okay, so we've explored chronotypes. We've talked about the potential benefits and drawbacks of early rising and the importance of listening to your body. But there's another piece to this I want to get into, the psychology of habit formation. You sent over some research on how our brains actually create habits, and I'm wondering how all of that ties into this whole 5 a.m. club concept.
That's a great point. Building any new habit, especially one that involves changing your sleep patterns, requires understanding how our brains work.
So we've said that sticking to a 5 a.m. routine or any routine really, it's all about habit formation. What does the research say about how we can actually make this change stick, make it sustainable?
Well, one of the key things researchers have found is that our brains, they really crave consistency. So when we repeat something over and over again, our brains actually create these neural pathways that make that action easier. It becomes more automatic.
So it's like building a mental shortcut. Like the more you travel down that path, the smoother it gets and the more familiar it becomes.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Those neural pathways can be strengthened or weakened. It all depends on our actions. So if we consistently reinforce a habit, those pathways become like superhighways in our brain. If we start skipping days or changing things up, those pathways start to fade.
Okay, so consistency is key. But, life happens. We all know that. What happens when you inevitably miss a day or two? Does that mean you've derailed the whole process?
Not necessarily. The key is to get back on track as quickly as possible. And I think this is where self-compassion comes in. Don't beat yourself up if you miss a day or two. Just acknowledge it and then, recommit to the habit the next day.
That's such good advice. I think a lot of people, myself included, we tend to get so discouraged when we slip up and then we just give up altogether.
Yeah, it's definitely a common pattern. But remember, building any new habit takes time and effort. It's a journey, not a destination. And there are going to be bumps along the way. Just focus on the progress, not perfection.
I love that. Okay, so we've got consistency and self-compassion. Any other strategies for making that 5 a.m. habit really solid?
One technique that I see recommended a lot is habit stacking. And this is basically linking your new habit to an existing one. So let's say you already have a solid habit of brushing your teeth every morning. Maybe try adding in a quick meditation right after you brush your teeth.
Oh, so you're kind of piggybacking on an already established neural pathway, makes it easier for your brain to adopt that new behavior.
Exactly. And it's really important to start small. Don't try to overhaul your entire routine overnight. Start with a small change, something manageable, like waking up 15 minutes earlier than usual, and then gradually increase it from there.
That makes a lot of sense. Small, consistent steps lead to big changes over time, right?
Absolutely. And don't forget about the power of rewards. When you successfully stick to your new routine, celebrate those wins no matter how small they seem. Maybe treat yourself to a really good cup of coffee or take a few minutes to just enjoy the quiet of the morning. Those positive associations can really help reinforce the habit.
It's like giving your brain a little pat on the back, like, good job, you did it.
Exactly. Positive reinforcement can go a long way.
Okay, so today we've really covered a lot of ground. The potential benefits and drawbacks of the 5 a.m. club, the whole science of chronotypes, and how our brains form habits. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are your biggest takeaways? What are you going to keep thinking about as you explore this concept more on your own?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to productivity or well-being. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's totally okay.
Absolutely. It's all about finding what works for you, for your unique circumstances and goals.
And it's a journey, not a race. Experiment, be patient with yourself, and keep learning and growing along the way.
So if you're feeling inspired to try the 5 a.m. club, go for it. But do it with awareness and self-compassion. And know that you have the power to create a routine that truly supports your best life.
And if the 5 a.m. club just doesn't resonate with you, that's perfectly fine. There are tons of other ways to design a day that really works for you. One that maximizes your energy, your focus, your overall well-being. The most important thing is to be intentional and mindful. Keep striving to create a life that truly lights you up.
That is the perfect note to end on. That's it for our deep dive into the 5 a.m. club. We hope you found this conversation insightful and empowering. Remember, knowledge is power. And the more we understand about ourselves and the world around us, the better choices we can make. Choices that support our growth, our well-being, and our overall success.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep creating a life that's truly authentic and fulfilling.